Welcome to Inspiring Possible. I'm Christy Pennison, former stuck person turned therapist and dream consultant. Are you feeling stuck, overwhelmed, uncertain, or just need a little inspiration? Then I want to help you gain the clarity, confidence, and courage to create possibilities and live a life you love. Because folks, life's too short to be miserable. Hey, yo, friends. Thanks for coming back to listen to another episode of Inspiring Possible. I am beyond excited for our guest today because she is somebody that I have watched in the wings in my own professional journey and learned so much from. So I always am kind of like, in case you don't know this, but I'm always like, oh, what's Kasey doing now? What can I learn from Kasey? Oh, she's got this thing that's going to teach me how to do this. Let me go get it. And so it's really an honor and a privilege to have Kasey Compton on the show today. And we're going to be talking about something that I know I resonated and am resonating with as I'm reading her newest book. But I also think you'll resonate with it too, because a lot of this podcast is around how do we create possibilities for our life? What are some mindset shifts that needs to happen? What are some things that we can put in place? What are the things that we do need to help support us in reaching our goals? But sometimes what can happen in pursuit of all these amazing things that we want to do, sometimes the doing becomes not enough. And so Kasey recently wrote this phenomenal book that you're just going to have to get it. I'm just going to go ahead and put it out there before we even start our conversation. It's called In Search of You, How to Find More Joy When Doing More Isn't Doing It Anymore. And so welcome to the show, Kasey.
Thank you. Thank you. I love this accent. It just cracks me. You're like a whole nother level of country.
I know. Listen, it's so funny, Kasey. When I lived overseas when I was very young, probably around 19, this was the days of calling cards. You remember the calling cards?
Yes, I have them.
And so I was overseas, and the only way I could call home, and these were the days of dial-up internet, I remember calling my mom. And I had been around a lot of British accents, other American accents, because there were people at the school that I was going to that had American accents. But no one's accent got picked on as much as mine.
Uh-huh.
And then when I called my mom for the first time after being over there for a few weeks, I was like, oh my gosh, is that what I sound like? So, it's so funny because you're from the South too, right? But there's different versions of accent. Man, those were the days. Gosh, sometimes I wish I could rewind back to the days of less distraction I love the World Wide Web and these phones and everything, but there was a simpler time that really allowed you, which may be a good preface to our conversation, to tune in more to yourself. But tell me a little bit about why you were, because I know this book was not the initial book that you were looking to write.
Yeah.
And then it just it found as well. So tell a little bit of story about why you're kind of passionate or how this book came to you.
Mm-hmm. So, all right. So my writing coach that I was working with at the time when I was launching my first book, she was really big into making writing just a part of your day. It's just a scheduled part of your day. You do it every day, same time, all the things. And she kind of drove it into my head that you're not going to stop. Even though your book is going out into the world, the very next day, you're going to do the same thing at the same time. You're going to sit down and you're going to write. And so it was just kind of understood thing that as soon as the first one comes out, the second one starts. And at that time, the book was going to be another business book. And I knew that all along. I knew I was going to write business books. But as time went on and the launch of the first book happened, I was going through a lot in my personal life, and a lot of changes. And I couldn't think about business. I couldn't focus on business, and all I wanted to write about was just was processing a lot of just my own, I don't know, just hurt life and all of it. And so that's kind of how it started. And as I was writing, I wasn't necessarily writing thinking, oh, this is going to be a book. I was just like writing.
Writing
And
for you. Like, this is me
right.
just doing
Yeah.
that thing that she told me I need to do every day and keep doing.
Yeah. That's what I was doing. And then I got about halfway through and I started noticing a lot of improvements in just the clarity that I was experiencing and how like that I didn't feel joy like I should and I wasn't as grateful for things as I should have been. And so as I started noticing the changes in myself, I was like, you know what? Maybe this is what I'm supposed to be writing about. And so I just kind of went with it.
To give listeners some context for people that don't know you, like at this point in your life, you had like built not one, but like a few businesses, right? Like tell a little bit about the backstory of where you're at whenever, because I think this is really going to be important for listeners to like just know the context of like the things that Kasey had created and what she means by like, I feel like I should have had more joy at this point when I got to this stage in the journey.
Yeah, okay, I see your point. That makes sense. So I started my business, my first business, which was a counseling practice in 2015. All right. So at that point, I started that business out honestly of just pure desperation because I was a therapist. I was doing in home work and I was driving a lot. I
Ooh, I remember those days, Kasey.
had
Whew.
bad, no fun.
I mean, listen, you learn a lot in that phase. I'd always say if you can do that, you can just do anything in the therapy counseling world.
Right. Yeah, I had a 4-year-old daughter at the time. I was doing counseling very much out of my car, and I found out that I was pregnant and had a super high risk pregnancy, like super bedridden. I mean, had to quit my job, couldn't walk, couldn't do anything, like literally completely nothing for 4 months straight. And so during
Wow.
that time, yeah, I lost my job, lost everything. So after I had the baby, who was healthy, thank goodness, and everybody was fine. But by the time I had the baby, I couldn't help but think, oh my gosh, like I had to file bankruptcy. I literally lost everything I had. Not which wasn't much, but still. I couldn't stop thinking about how I need to create something that is going to sustain me and my kids and my family if I can't physically work. Like I got really, really, really nervous. And so I thought, I'm just going to have to start my own practice and I'm going to have to hire people to do it. And so I did. Um, and was able to kind of recover from that bankruptcy, build that business, scaled it. I mean, we had about 100 employees at one point. I started another business, bought a bunch of properties, invested in properties, bought a beach house, put it on the rental market, used that as a vacation home, like all the things. I just was working my ass off to recover from something that was so shameful to me, which was filing bankruptcy. I mean, in my world, that was like the worst thing that could happen. I just wanted to prove that I could do it. So, I had a lot to be joyful about.
I mean,
And
younger you probably would have been like, woo, get
yeah,
it, girl. Even normal day me is like, woo, get it, girl. But yeah, in that point in your life, you're like, man, life is so different. I've worked hard to get to this place where I can create a security in a lot of ways and a safety that I didn't have during that phase of life when I was having my second child. And I had to pretty much just let everything go because I had no choice so that I
mhm,
can make sure that me and this child that gets into the world in a healthy way to go from that and then to create all these things that you did, which have been
mhm,
phenomenal, right? And then get to the point where you're launching, because I've read a little bit of the book. So disclaimer, I'm about to like give you a spoiler alert over here. But there's that part in the story where you talk about in the book about how you just launched your first book, which
mhm,
was a labor of love, right? Which should have been a moment that's like, hey, I'm so excited that this is happening. But I think it was almost that awareness that wait, things
mhm.
are just not this is not what I expected to feel like when I got here.
Right. Yeah, because writing a book was something that I had wanted to do since I was a little girl. My mom could even say, I don't, I just turned 40, so I can't even remember back when I was little, but I know I was like full on reading before I ever went to preschool. I just loved to read. And before I could read, I had the whole set of the Dr. Seuss books, like every one of them. And I couldn't read because I was too little. But my mom used to tell me that I memorized, like I would make her read them so many times that I had every
God
single.
bless her.
I know, and she's not a reader. But it was a dream of mine. And then, it's like I just woke up and thought, huh, is this it? I literally felt nothing. And then I felt guilty for feeling nothing. And it was just this really, really bad spiral. But also it was good because it was like my wake up call, you know?
Yeah. Like something's got to give. This is not,
Yeah.
this is not the way that I want to feel.
Mm-hmm.
Guilty for not feeling anything
Mm-hmm.
about
Mm-hmm.
this awesome thing that I just did.
Yeah. Well, I see all these therapists because, I do a lot of coaching and consulting. And so I work with practice owners all the time. And so often I see them reaching these huge milestones in their life, whether, they're opening a second location or a third location, or they're doing something, and they don't even sit still long enough to celebrate it. They're just like, oh, yeah,
Kasey, are you talking about me?
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. But it is true. It's okay. And maybe this is where we can get to this point in the conversation. Sometimes we get so used to doing,
Mhm.
we forget what it's like to be,
Oh, yeah.
really,
Yeah.
and relearning how to reconnect and be,
Mhm. Yeah.
is sometimes a challenge. And it's hard because especially when, and I know you talk about this in your book, but like when we place a lot of our worth and value, maybe not knowingly, it could be very unconscious,
Mhm.
on our value based off of our outcomes or our achievements.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think so many of us are going through life and we lack so much self-awareness because whether it's conscious or subconscious or not, I think there's a part of us that believes if we are living in the present and if we're staying self-aware that we won't be as productive. You know? Like I remember one time thinking, oh my gosh, like I'm so anxious. I don't feel good. Like this doesn't feel good to me. And I remember thinking, well, maybe I should go ask my doctor if they should prescribe me something. And then I talked myself out of it because I thought, oh my gosh, what if I'm not as productive? Like, what if I can't function like I used to? And if it chills me out and then I can't get anything done? And then it's just very unhealthy. But have you ever met someone that is just truly like, kind of reminds me of my massage therapist? She's super woo woo,
I love those woo woo people.
Yeah. Burning the incense, and she's talking about my chakras and and I'm just like, yeah. But have you ever met someone that's just totally in the present that's not happy? I
Yeah,
haven't.
no, I haven't. And you're actually two books that I picked up that I started reading at the beginning of this year. The Power of Now. And then
Mhm.
there's another book by Rob Dial that's How to Be Here. And
Uh,
just that was my goal this year, Kasey, actually, believe it or
yeah.
not, is I wanted to work on just being more present because you're right. When people are really, truly present, they're not worried about the future. They're not sitting there dwelling about the past. They're just in the moment, which is really what we all just have. We just have this moment right here. It's just it brings so much more peace and joy and just woosah. I don't know. I don't know the word that I'm trying to think of. But it just brings this certain type of calmness. And people that have really cultivated this art of being here right now in the present really do have this inner sense of peace that you can just sense. You just get around them and you're like, wow, I almost feel peaceful just by being in your presence.
I know.
So,
I know. It's crazy. And I think so many people that are high functioning, overachievers, they are living in the future to the 10th degree. So much so that everything they're doing is outcome driven, everything they're doing. And that was me. I realized that because I was so outcome driven in my business, and because I lacked the awareness around it, I was also becoming outcome driven in my life in other areas, like with my kids and with my family, and just everything was so outcome driven that if I wasn't getting reinforced, then I felt like I was not doing enough. Or another thing that people will connect with probably, and I also no awareness about this, was these messages that I had brought with me through childhood and adolescence into my adult life. And I was basically doing two things. Well, I was doing a lot of things, but I was um, I was trying to prove others. I was trying to prove myself, really. I was working so hard because I was like, I'm going to show them. You know, they told me I couldn't do it. They said blah, blah, blah. I'm going to show them. And I think a lot of us do that. And then the second thing is when I started becoming successful after all of that horrible stuff that had financially happened and with the bed rest and all that, it sort of became my success, sort of became my identity. And if
mm,
not contributing in a financial way, I did not feel like I was worthy.
yeah. Well, and let's talk about that for a little bit because I can remember when this shift happened for me. And again, I probably am still have some identity stuff that's wrapped up in there that needs to be unboxed and uncovered. But I can remember I felt this very vividly whenever I was working for an organization that had helped start a program for them before I did, the practice that I have now. But and I had put so much, you know how it is, Kasey, blood, sweat, tears. I felt like it was my baby, but it wasn't my baby because I didn't even have no ownership in that baby. But
Yeah.
I just put a lot of into it. And I remember there was a point in time where it was my wake up call that I was so overwhelmed. I was so burnt out. I was like, pretty much not good. I was not good.
Mhm.
And I remember I just came to this awareness, kind of like a rock bottom moment where I'm like, there has to be more to life than this. This
Mhm.
cannot be what my life is. And
Yeah.
I remember I transitioned to a completely different role where I was in a role of like, more leadership and administrative. And I transferred into a role where I was like just showing up and doing some therapy and then going home. And it was kind of actually more to part time basis, really. I don't know how I survived that year, but I made it through. And it was great for me because it was helpful for me to like reconnect with me because I was so burnt out. But I remember I went through so many months of identity loss
Yeah.
because I had so identified as being the regional director of this organization and this was who I was. And then to go from that to then go to just like showing up every day
Yeah.
um, in a different capacity that did not have any responsibility, it was really, really weird. And I
Mhm.
had to figure out how to process through that. So, what helped you move when you hit your kind of moment of like, something's got to be different?
Mhm.
What were the steps you've taken, or what are the things that you found helped you move to a place of more joy and calm and
Yeah.
self love, love for self?
Yeah, I think it's certainly a ongoing process, and it's something that is I have to be very intentional about, and it's actually something that I'm intentional about every single day. But when I was just in the thick of it, um, one of the things that I realized that I was holding on to a lot of fear. And so the first thing I did was just allowing myself, and I did a lot of this in therapy, to remember things about my past and about like my childhood. And so as I was writing the book, when I kind of went back through and started editing and writing, I just kind of called this section the big things. Like I just listed out all the big things in my life. And it wasn't like this big type A, like chart. And, it was literally just like lines and things. And, I put on there graduations, births, deaths, moves, marriages, divorces, just like all the big things that come up, because I was someone that had a lot of memory blocks and I couldn't figure out why. So I just did that first, and that was pretty quick. And then I started looking at it, like laying it out on paper and just looking at it. And I started noticing some patterns of, like every time something traumatic happened to me, then something else crazy, like I did something stupid, and so as I was noticing these patterns, I was remembering more and more and more. And so then I started listing out the other memories as the little things. And those were things that you'll get to in the book if you haven't already, about like suitcases. And these were really my triggers. These were triggers for me, both good and bad. Suitcases had these meanings that I didn't like and that was affecting me. Feet, noticing and thinking about like feet brought me so many memories about religious trauma. Eggs, the smell of cigarettes, like all these little things just almost like just explode in my memory networks. And so once I actually was able to remember and let myself remember and process, then I was able to start healing some of those old wounds. And just allowing myself, like there's this unbelievable amount of grace that I felt for myself for the first time ever. Like, oh, okay. So this is why I get so angry in these types of situations. It goes all the way back to when I was like 10. And then this was, so it was so enlightening to be able to remember those things and have it drawn out. Because you can't love someone you don't know or don't understand.
Ooh, that's good, Kasey. And it's very interesting because there's a lot of ironies, right, in this because, we're both therapists at heart, right? But you can draw these lines for everybody else, which is why it's important to do your own work because you can't always draw these lines. And I do think we forget so much along the journey of who we are actually and why there are things that make us react in a good and not so great ways sometimes.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like as you just took some time to like really get clear on what are these big things, being more aware of them, but then also trying to do the work to say like, okay, well, now that I've identified these, let's think of some other things. How did you get to those little things? Was it more just therapy and processing or what helped you get to the little things?
Yeah, it was a lot of external processing because I'm not an external processor. I don't talk about, like, I will just sit in quiet and my mind is just churning. But I live with someone who is an external processor. And so she's constantly like, what are you thinking about right now? What does that mean? And so she was like,
so it was like pulling it out of you.
Forcing it out of me. And I'll tell you really quickly, this is kind of funny. I don't know if you've got to this part in the book, but when you're talking about the little things and the connections, so the way that I was thinking about the little things in our lives, they're like the threads. And all together, it's like makes up a tapestry or some form of a fabric. And I was writing a story about I was married twice, been divorced twice. So I was writing this story about my current divorce and about the person that I was divorcing and blah, 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 blah. Well, I didn't say his name in the story at all. And I didn't even think I was going to publish this in the book. Okay. So this was just really like me trying to understand this person because I was trying to like release shame and guilt of myself. And so I had to kind of get an understanding of this person. So I'm writing and I'm like, hey, Kelsey, let me read this to you real quick. Tell me how this sounds. So it's just this short, probably a page. And I read it to her out loud. And she said, yeah, that's good. I was like, you think so? She said, yeah. She said, it's about Frank, right? Frank's number one,
Mm-hmm.
Jacob's number two. And I was like, no, that story is about Jacob. And she was like, no way. I said, yeah. And then it's like, I had this epiphany. I was just like, oh my God, I married Frank's clone. And then when I started like going back through history, all the men in my life are exactly the same, like exactly the same, which makes sense of why they're not good for me. But there's also this comfort there. It
Mm-hmm.
felt like it was familiar.
Familiar.
Right. It wasn't right. It was just familiar. And like things like that, I was like, holy crap. Like I would have, if I would not have read that out loud.
And that's what's so crazy, Kasey. And I think you're bringing up a good point is like, not only did you go through the process of continuing to write, right, about through this phase of your life, you also were seeking your own therapy and going through that process there. But then another thing you were doing is as you were writing, you had a safe space to
Mhm.
externally process some of this stuff that in your mind makes a lot of sense. Like I'm just seeing it happen right now. Like,
Yeah.
yes, in my mind, that was about, was it about number one, number two? I'm even getting confused. But it was about number one. And then to have it somebody who knows you, right? To then reflect back to be like, yeah, that's about that's about so and so. And you're like, huh? No,
Yeah.
that's not what I was going for. And that's what I think there is powerful for those that are listening. They've heard me on this show, Kasey, talk about like therapy. And I was one of the people that was late to therapy too as a therapist. Okay. Like seriously, last year, I was like, maybe I should try this thing that I tell everybody to go do. And then I was having all these range of emotions as this person started pulling up stuff. And I'm like, so
Yeah.
this is what I do to people, but it's been such a good journey and it's been a good for me to go through all these like pulling of the yarns, as you would say, to uncover what the tapestry really is.
Yeah.
But you need those people to be able to have them pull it out of you in some way or fashion form, whether it be writing, whether it be reflecting, whatever safe space it is. And then sometimes just reflect back to you what they heard. And it sounds so simplistic, but I
Mhm.
can't tell you the amount of times people have reflected back to me. And in my mind, this certain thing makes sense. And
Mhm.
when they say it back there, I'm like, wow. Okay, so I've been telling myself this story this whole time that is a lie,
Yeah.
or is not exactly correct. Or, hey, I'm thinking it's about this situation, but it's really about this situation. It's crazy.
Mhm. Yeah, it is. It is. And we just keep on going. Like
Yeah.
we keep doing more and more and more and more. And while all along all these things are just getting piled up in our bodies and they need to come out.
Yeah.
Um so yeah, I think everyone deserves the the opportunities to express themselves free of judgment, free of any biases or anything like that. And, one of the things since writing the book and finishing the book and whatever people have said to me is like, you just seem so different. And I'm thinking, like, yeah, because there was so much that I got to off of my body and my brain and everything else. But then we were talking about just that, like, I'm so much more present now that of course, like those two things in combination makes for a whole different person.
Yeah. But it is being, one thing I keep on hearing in our conversation is it really does require intention.
Hmm.
Like, we're not going to wake up tomorrow and just be aware 100% without doing the work to become more aware. And I think it's so easy. And I was listening to this incredible interview. I'm going to have to send it to you, Kasey, with Dr. John Deloney. I don't know if you've heard of him. He talks about, he writes a book called Building a Non-Anxious Life and has talked a lot about the topic of anxiety. But in our interview with him, he was sharing, he went through the exact almost same process, kind of
Yeah.
like that you've experienced whenever he released this book into the world. And then realizing how there were certain things that were coming up that were brought into his awareness
Hmm.
that he's like, shoot, I thought I loved myself. But then I realized when I was in my own thing that my therapist, asked me, hey, I want you to put your hand up against your heart and say, I love me. And he's like, I just couldn't do it.
I know.
I couldn't do it. And he's like, and then I realized, man, I got to work on this. So, it is a constant state of becoming aware. But I'm curious, Kasey, what helped get you to a point? Because haven't gotten this far in the book, but it jumped out to me. And so sometimes when things jump out to me, I say, I'm gonna go with that because something is bringing me to this point. Okay. And I just turned to a page and then this is what popped out. But it was a part of your book where you're talking about your awareness of you got to a point where you were able to love yourself more. And I think your therapist asked, why do you think I asked you to rate how much you loved yourself to begin with in the first session? And you said, because without self-love, I'm not strong enough to face my fears, comb through my past, and remember hard things. I needed that, and I still do. Because when I love myself, I don't need to worry about anyone leaving me because I'm enough. I'm worthy of love, even if it is only for myself. Because when you love yourself, you see the world differently.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like through this process, was there any other things that you felt this is what helped me get to this self-love piece? Was it learning to be more aware and the big things and the little things and learning to let love and let go of those things? Was there ever a point that was like really pivotal for you that you just went into that place of acceptance of like, you know what? I do love me,
I mean, yes, there's a lot of like small moments where I thought something very similar to what you just read. But one of the things I remember, I'm trying to just kind of give your listeners a little bit of a timeline. Okay, so book launch party happened in my dream home, which I don't know if you've read the red fold up chair story yet. Tends to be everyone's favorite story. It's kind of in the middle of the book, but dream home, I kind of manifested that. Was what people tell me. I'm not a manifester. I don't. I just recently learned what that was, but I have. But book
You're
launch.
a goal getter. A goal getter.
There we go. That's realistic to me. But the launch of my first book happened in that home. Very shortly after, I had to put that home up for sale in a divorce. Had to split the money, obviously, with my ex-husband. That crushed me. That was really tough. So I would say about 2 years into this whole journey, which was about a 3-year journey, about 2 years in, I'm living in a different house, about a fraction of the size of the one that I used to live in. So everyone's like all cram packed in there. And Kelsey and I had been together a while. Like, I mean, we were together while my divorce was proceeding. So it had been a while. And we had a lot to figure out in our relationship because it was just one first female I'd ever been in a relationship with. She had a kid. I'd never dated somebody that had a kid. Our parenting styles were totally different. Our exes were psycho. Like, I mean, all these things.
A lot of things to try to like move through so that we can have a
normal,
healthy, happy relationship.
Communication styles were totally different. It's easy to fight with a man. Like, that's never been a problem for me. Fighting with a female is totally different. There's just all these things. And I remember her and I were in an argument over something, and everything, just like every time we would get into an argument, it would feel like such high stakes. Like, in my mind, everything was such high stakes. It was such all or nothing, And I recognized it, but I didn't know what to do about it. And so every time that we would argue, in my mind, I would go to, oh my God, she's going to leave. Like, she's leaving. Here we go. I'm going to have to do this all over again. All the things we tell ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And at a certain point, like I just exhausted myself. I was just over myself. I was like, this is stupid. Like, you are being absolutely ridiculous. This is not, this is not sustainable. You cannot act like this. Like, I was anxious all the time and like, whatever. And I just remember being at our new house, and I was laying down in the bed, and I was like facing my nightstand. And I just remember having another epiphany, and I was like, okay, so from now on, we are going to be okay, independent of anyone else. And so if someone else if Kelsey's mad at me, then Kelsey can be mad at me. I am okay in this moment. Nothing has to be done right now. Nothing has to be decided right now, blah, 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 blah. All this stuff. And so I kind of got myself into this like mantra, whatever you call it. It just depends on my mood of, you are okay in spite of or independent of blank. And that helped me. I know that sounds so tiny and little, but
but it's what you needed, right?
Yeah, my whole entire life had been paired up with something. So like if something was going on bad at home, I just brought it right on with me. Like it just came on to work, and I was never one that could separate it. And so that was huge, because once I started practicing that separation and that all or nothing thinking, that was like the like whenever you're running I don't run, but like when you run and you get
I run sometimes, but I make people, I go to a place where they pretty much force me to run, and everybody else is running. So you know what I mean? Like, and it's short distances, Kasey, but I'm like, everybody else is running. I guess I got to run now.
That counts. That counts. But like at the end, when you can see it, you're like,
when you can see the end in sight,
you just get like this wind, that little lesson that I gave myself was like my wind that I needed to get to move into that next phase of my life. And man, that has just like helped me so much at work, like with my ex, with co-parenting, everything. Like I'm okay independent of blank. And I don't know. I mean, it was just something that made the world of difference, and I needed it.
And I think that ties into a lot of self-love, right? Because you learn, and it's a process. So what we're talking about also for anybody listening, this is an ongoing process, goes up, down, round and round. Some days you're like, yes, I'm all in it. And then other days you're like, reverting back to old stuff. But anyways, old stories and things like that. So it is a constant process. But I would say what I'm hearing is you got to the place where you were able to say like, I'm okay even if all these conditions don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Or I love myself, even if I'm not performing at this rate that in my mind I should perform at.
Right.
Or, hey, I am worthy despite what I do or who I'm with or what's going down. Like, because I'm awesome. And you know what? And not that we don't awesome and we don't take a responsibility, but to get to a place where you are able to love yourself, it really is a gift. That is it, and it takes work to get there. I wish we all just popped out and said, you know what? I love myself when I'm a kid. I mean, when you're a kid, you actually do this very well.
Yeah.
And then it's all those messages and those big things and those little things and those stories that we just keep on carrying on with us.
Yeah.
And if we don't learn to unpack them and let them go, then they become a narrative for our whole life. And it kind of robs us from really being able to connect back to who we are, independent of anything else.
There you go. That's it.
But it's all a journey, folks. So we haven't arrived yet. We're still a work in progress. So what do you think for those that are like, man, I'm listening to y'all's conversation. I got to go pick up this book because I need some more joy in my life. What was the hope that you would hope readers get from picking up this book?
Well, I hope that readers obviously experience more joy. But I guess I just want people to feel that balance, like that. It sounds so cheesy, but like you can have work, you can have a successful career and feel this way. It doesn't have to be all or nothing, It doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can have both. And I think I would just hope that readers are able to pay a little bit more attention to their own lives and their own patterns and make the changes necessary to be able to experience that.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I tell people, Kasey, is, and I'm sure, I mean, you are the one person that's going to be with you from start to finish.
Yeah.
Now, I hope for us all, we have some loved ones around us, on our final moments, whenever that is. But the reality is, we don't never know when we're going to jump off this ship.
Right.
And, we have ourselves
Mhm.
to be with.
Mhm.
So might as well make it a good relationship,
Exactly.
And good relationships and healthy relationships take time, right, Kasey? They don't. Has
Yes.
that been your experience? They don't just materialize. It
Oh,
takes some work and effort. So
100%. 100%. And you
mm,
have so much more, there's just so much more richness in those relationships when you do take the time to build that dialogue and that communication and that trust. And even though it sounds like I'm talking about like with a partner, but I mean, it could very easily just be with yourself too.
yeah. Well, what is one? If you were to go back to younger you, and you can pick which life stage around this journey, because you mapped it, so it's fresh on your mind. If you were to go to a certain point in your journey and give one piece of whether it be advice, encouragement, whatever, to
Mhm.
younger Kasey.
Well, I wouldn't have listened. Uh,
Thank you for being honest about that. I'm sure most of us wouldn't have listened if older us steps in and shows up in younger us's life and be like, listen, I'm going
yeah,
to tell you a word of wisdom. So
yeah.
when you get to this point in the road, but
I think okay. I think if I could go back and tell my younger self something, it would be that it would be something along the lines of encouraging myself to release shame. Because the shame, I experienced shame for things that I did that were not good, but also for things that I did that were fine. It was just others' perception of that I should be ashamed of myself. So I think if we can forgive ourselves faster, we can move forward better. And I think that held me back for a long time.
yeah, I love that. And if we could only go back and say, look,
Mhm.
don't listen to yourself or them people. Give yourself a little grace and compassion.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Don't do
Oh.
anything, you know?
But we learn from all that stuff, right, Kasey?
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy. It wouldn't be who we are if we didn't have it a part of our story, even though you're like, I could have avoided learning that lesson.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish that wouldn't happen.
Oh, well, okay. So if people are like, I need to get this book, and guys, it really is a good book. I mean, you need to get it. I think it's going to not, by Kasey vulnerably sharing her story, I think you're going to learn a lot of things of how to do the work for your own self. But how can they find this book, Kasey?
Well, you can find it pretty much anywhere. It's distributed everywhere, all major bookstores. Amazon is an easy place. Most places, if you're ordering online, will have the first 31 pages for free. So you can kind of read it and see if it sounds like something you would be interested in. But yeah, you can check it out anywhere. And then the audiobook drops April 30th as well.
Ooh, okay. So for those that are like, Christy, I ain't picked up a book since
Yeah.
2005 and you're a listener, guess what? There is a audio version coming your way. Because I know some people, they drive and they love listening to audiobooks. So
And
it's coming.
I read it. So if I read it and suffered for 9 hours, please buy it because for sure.
A real labor of love, huh?
Uh-huh.
Real labor of love. Well, Kasey, I just want to acknowledge you and really show some appreciation for you because truly, truly, I have learned so much from you throughout the years. I have the first book back here, Fix This Next, for healthcare professionals. And, it's just been so fun to have met you along this journey. But I really want to acknowledge you because I do know that being able to truly, honestly do the work to put part of your life journey into a book for other people. Number one, I think it gives a lot of us permission to be like, yes, me too. Right. Like I can have memories that are similar to that, or I can see where she's coming from, or I felt that way as well. So for the fact that you were like, listen, I'm going to stay true to me. I could write this second business book, but that's not where I'm feeling led to do. And I really feel like this needs to be put out into the world. And then being brave enough to say, yes, I'm going to do this. And I know it's going to help some other people along the way find joy because I know I'm not the only one. It always takes that person that's got to be brave and be vulnerable, like Brene Brown talks about, to just brave the wilderness.
Yeah.
But you did that. And I think this is going to be a really powerful book that's going to affect a lot of people to help them hopefully get on their own path towards more joy in their life. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. And all the words. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, okay, guys, y'all know I like to try to leave y'all with one thing that I'm taking away. And number one, I'm taking away a lot. I'm already in the thick of this book. So stay tuned. I'm about halfway through. So I'll let y'all know when I get to the end. But I do want to encourage you. Something that Kasey said that I think is really important is that if we can learn to go back and forgive ourselves a little sooner, give ourselves a little bit more grace and compassion on this journey called life, then maybe we can move forward towards joy faster. And so our hope for you, or at least my hope for you today, is that you can find your path towards joy and a little bit more presence. Until next time. That's all for today on Inspiring Possible. If you found a little inspiration today, please go on over to iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you tune in to listen to leave us a comment and rate us. Also, make sure and link up with me at inspiringpossible.com to get the free Dream It, Write It, Do It workbook. And don't forget to follow us on social media and share this with anyone who needs to be inspired. Remember, if you can believe it, it's possible.